What's going on, guys and gals? My name is Shadox, and today we're going to talk about the TTK in the latest alpha build of Battlefield 5, why it was changed, and what side effects this has caused, and try to come to a conclusion of whether or not these changes benefit or harm the game as a whole, and how it affects you as the player. We have quite a bit to go through, so let's get started. In this video, I will not be using worthless arguments like, oh, this makes the game feel sluggish, or now everybody's a bullet sponge. While these comments do portray the results and symptoms of the changes, they do not provide any insight onto how the changes actually impact the game. I want to first briefly touch upon what changes I am referring to. I went in depth on all the weapon changes in a previous video, so if you want a more detailed look at that, you can click the card in the top right hand corner of the screen or the link down in the description. But, in summary, the max damage for the STG was reduced, as well as the damage curves being drawn in for most weapons. In this video, I'm primarily going to talk about the Sturmgewehr, as it is the heaviest source of debate currently amongst the Battlefield community. As a result of the changes implemented to this build, the STG went from being a 4 bullet to kill at close range and 6 at further ranges, to being 5 up close and 6 at a distance. At first glance, this doesn't seem like a large shift in damage, as the weapon only requires 1 more bullet to kill. However, when we take a look at the resulting changes to the time to kill of the weapon, we see something a bit different. Originally, with the 4 bullets to kill, or BTK for short, the weapon came in with a minimum time to kill of 300 milliseconds, assuming no headshots. After the nerf, it now comes in with a 400 millisecond time to kill, TTK for short. The easiest way to visualize this difference is to compare weapons with similar TTKs from past Battlefields. In the most recent title, Battlefield 1, the recently added Burton LMR for the support class boasts a TTK of 293 milliseconds, and we can compare this to the M1917 Browning with its TTK of 402 milliseconds. Ignoring other factors including ADS time and hipfire accuracy, this is a comparable raw TTK shift to that of the STG with a difference of 109 milliseconds. Going back to Battlefield 4, for those who may have skipped Battlefield 1, the AEK boasts a TTK of 273 milliseconds, and we can compare this to the starting weapon in the assault rifle category, the AK-12 at 373 milliseconds, 100 millisecond increase on the dot. Both of these scenarios, the Burton compared with the M1917 Browning, or the AEK versus the AK-12, they both represent an accurate depiction of the shift in time to kill for the STG. There's a world of difference in just a tenth of a second, and this is the difference between what is great in close quarters and relegated to long-range standoffs in BF1, or in the case of Battlefield 4, it is the difference between the best AR and the worst. Now, I'm not going to stop here and say, see, look at the numbers. Numbers are bad. This change is bad. That would be idiotic and not help the conversation in the slightest. So let's start talking about some of the unintended side effects of this change. One very common complaint that I had seen regarding the first iteration of the STG was that it reintroduced microbursting from Battlefield 4, where users could control their weapons far more effectively by firing 2 to 3 rounds at a time and extend their overall effective range with the firearm. One major contributor to this in the alpha was the fact that the first shot recoil multiplier was set to a value of 1, meaning that your second shot would not incur a recoil penalty, and this allowed for tap firing to be just as effective as holding down the trigger. This value was very likely to change based on conversations with developers, but as it stood, this value greatly enabled the microbursting that we did see in the alpha. So what does this have to do with the TTK shift? Well, as a side effect of a slower TTK at close ranges, the weapon is now more effective at those slightly longer ranges, where users feel safer and more comfortable engaging enemies. Since you are now at longer ranges, bursts of 5 to 6 rounds is much more difficult, and a more reliable way to kill your targets effectively is to tap fire the weapon. In the first alpha build, tap firing the STG was primarily used on targets much further out past its intended engagement distance. But now in this build, we can easily see that tap firing or microbursting is much more effective in its areas of use. So the act of slowing down the TTK has only increased the viability of the microbursting meta that people seem to hate so much. Level design is hard. It's possibly one of the most difficult jobs in the game development scene from a creative standpoint. The goal is to create a sandbox where both teams have equal footing, but also ensure that there's enough room for creativity on the player side. Players will always be making decisions based on what is most likely to help them succeed and stay alive. A sign of a well-balanced map is where people are fairly evenly spread out, looking for those opportunities to take the objective. The first alpha build demonstrated this fairly well in my opinion. Yes, there were a few key spots where it turned into a slaughterhouse, namely the bridge spanning the southern side of the map, but you could find squads running all over the place looking to flank and secure an objective. Slowing down the TTK has an interesting effect on this balance, however. The primary reason for this is the simple fact that a slower TTK makes engaging multiple targets much more difficult. For this reason alone, we can look into the game and see that the slow TTK leads to a Zerg effect, where people will stick to a large group and move as a stampede. And in Battlefield's case, this leads to a merry-go-round effect where the majority of players on one team will move from point to point as one, leaving vast areas of the map virtually untouched. As I stated, this is primarily due to the fact that engaging multiple enemies is far more difficult with a slower TTK. Where before, you may have been able to drop 2 or 3 enemies without them reacting, slowing this down will lead to many circumstances where the person being shot at or their buddy can react and stop your flank attempt short. So then, how do you adjust your playstyle so that you are more likely to win those engagements? You stick close to your teammates and hope that they will help you out in that situation. Ideally, this mentality should exist to some extent, as it should be more beneficial to roll with a squad than to lone wolf. This is a belief that I still firmly hold, but rarely does it stop there. This effect can now unfortunately be seen on Narvik, where the teams make this loop pattern with the objectives, with the main areas of conflict being Delta and Charlie, because that's where the two paths intersect. Opportunist individuals and squads that either understand how to take advantage of this situation or are just looking to break away from the herd. They are the ones trailing behind the other team, capping their flags as soon as they leave. This style of play can be extremely fun and rewarding, but it comes at a great risk, as if the loop is broken, then you or your squad will have the entire enemy team bearing down on you. For those sticking with the herd, this results in a slowing down of the pace of the game as a whole. Sure, some of those engagements will still be exciting, and you'll be more likely to survive significantly longer since there should be a plethora of medics nearby and other people to absorb bullets for you. But this also leaves less potential for you as an individual to feel that you contributed significantly to the success of your team, less overall kills, and less impact from the decisions that you made. For those players who just want to chill and play Battlefield, this may be exactly what they are looking for. But at least to me, this waters down the experience of the game to little more than that of a wartime scenery simulator. This next statement will seem counterintuitive and contradicting what I spoke about in the last section. But don't worry, I'm going to back up my claims. A slower time to kill leads to faster paced gunplay. That sentence doesn't really make sense on the surface, so let's break down how I came to this conclusion and how it applies to Battlefield. First, I want you to compare what differentiates Call of Duty and Battlefield. Combined arms? Sure. Destruction? Absolutely. But when it comes to gunplay, what are the primary differences that you are imagining? For Call of Duty, it is likely rushing around, bunny hopping, and trying to style on your opponents, where maybe Battlefield is a bit more tactical, methodical, and decision-based shooter. Now, why do these two titles oppose each other when it comes to gunplay so much? A big part of it is the raw time to kill of the weapons. Let's take a look at the recent Black Ops 4 beta to get some insight. The fastest killing weapon in Black Ops 4 currently, outside of shotguns and other one-hit kill weapons, has a TTK of 400 milliseconds, and the slowest killing at 540 milliseconds. These values are double that of the fastest killing SMGs in both Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1, with the AS Val and the machine gun pistol both having a TTK of about 200 milliseconds. Most automatic weapons in Battlefield 4 and BF1 will fall between 270 milliseconds to 400 milliseconds. So what styles of play do we see develop from these weapons? We can easily infer that due to a slower TTK, moving while shooting is a must. Bunny hopping, sliding, AD spam, or strafing, these are all symptoms of a slow time to kill, as you must make yourself as hard to hit as possible, and a slower time to kill allows you to do just that. It seems that every Battlefield has had an issue with some sort of movement spam. Battlefield 3 had bunny hopping, Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1 both suffered from AD spam for a significant portion of their lives, and still do to some extent. A lot of my playtime in the new alpha build has been spent hopping around corners just to try to get that much more of an edge to deal with those multiple targets. On the other extreme end, we can look to Rainbow Six Siege, which has an extremely fast time to kill and rewards headshots with an instant death. And how do we see the playstyle develop from there? Rainbow Six Siege is one of the slowest paced and most tactical shooter out in the market currently, but it has the fastest gunplay. So how does that make sense? Well, it is the same situation, just in reverse from Call of Duty. Battlefield should be a mixture of those two, somewhere a balancing act between super fast and super slow. Coming back to Battlefield 5, the slower TTK allows people to move without thinking. They can sprint across a street, no worries, they'll just absorb the bullets and keep on moving. There's also been a significant increase in players that I just could not finish the kill on because they would pop behind some cover as soon as bullets started flying, even with getting multiple headshots. In a faster TTK scenario, the movement just before engaging is far more important. Getting the drop on your target, peeking that corner, or whatever gets you the advantage before the bullets start flying. Rather than reacting to situations, you should always be planning your engagements. Surprise is the biggest element in a firefight, and as it stands now, surprising your enemy doesn't do a whole hell of a lot. This section will be fairly short simply because many of the points overlap with the movement section, but I do want to draw a distinction between the two. Positioning is all about where you are relative to your enemy, and what cover and concealment is between the two of you. With a faster TTK system, players who consistently judge how exposed he is and use that to plan his movements will always have the advantage. Something as simple as not walking on ridgelines or getting too close to windows all play into this. Positioning should be one of the biggest deciding factors in a gunfight, as explained earlier. This is the single biggest way that an individual can improve their play aside from accuracy and recoil management. So, keeping this in mind, how does TTK affect the positioning skill? Just like in the movement system, players are punished far less with a slower time to kill, meaning that the overall skill required is lowered. A good player with superior positioning will still have an advantage, but far less than that where a system has a fast time to kill. When I first sat down to think about the ramifications for this TTK shift, I initially believed that one of its saving graces was an increased importance on headshots. This actually turned out to be false and another argument against a higher TTK. Keeping in line with the rest of the conversation, let's take a look at what the benefits are for headshots with the STG. Prior to the nerf, the STG dealt a 27 max damage with a 2.0 headshot damage multiplier. This gave a damage of 54 per headshot, meaning that you could potentially drop your target in 2 shots rather than 4. This then results in you dropping your target in just 100 milliseconds. But let's say that taking the extra time to go for those headshots adds 100 milliseconds to your time to kill, bringing this number up to 200. This is still a 50% saving on your TTK rather than just body shots. Now let's see how the new damage model of 20 damage per shot stacks up. Keeping the 2.0 headshot multiplier, each round will now deal 40 damage. This means that it still takes 3 bullets to kill, which alone takes 200 milliseconds, and adding that extra tenth of a second to get those headshots, you get 300 milliseconds, which is only a 25% reduction in TTK. What this means is that while headshots are still important, yes, they are half as effective at reducing TTK as previously, meaning that investing the time and effort to master control of the weapon isn't worth the work for many players, and this does not even take into account the increased difficulty of landing an additional headshot. More work for less reward. Goodbye skilled gunplay. So what about accuracy in general? Surely that since you need to land more shots, your recoil management should be more important now than it was prior, right? Again, no. The penalty of missing a shot is 100 milliseconds added to your TTK for both the old and the new damage models. But the old model meant that missing just one shot was a 33% increase in your TTK from 300 to 400 milliseconds. The new model only penalizes you 25% an increase in your TTK from 400 to 500. And again, we see this dumbing down the system to require less skill overall. So after all of this, why have we seen such an outcry from the community regarding the STG, calling it OP even when it's fairly average compared to past titles even in Battlefield 1? While I can't be 100% sure, I personally believe that a significant portion of the user frustration regarding the TTK in the first alpha was netcode related. Many times there were some slight server instabilities or just issues with the build outright. And this is to be expected. It's an alpha test, not a finished product. But due to the hiccups with either the server or the build itself, it presented an interesting topic that not many players will think about: the difference between your time to kill and the perceived time to die. Between packet loss, ping, tick rate of the server, or even frame rate of your gaming rig. All of these factors can create a separation between the time to kill and your perceived time to die from the same weapon. The server may very well register all the bullets hitting you just fine, but your game may update your health all at once, leading to frustration and a seemingly instant death. Once again, this is conjecture, and I don't have any equipment to test my theory. I was hoping that Battle Nonsense would do a netcode test, but with it being an alpha, he may not have felt it was worth his time. Regardless, I believe that this is one of the more likely issues plaguing this conversation. Another issue that presented itself is the lack of comparison to other weapons of a similar style. All of the other weapons in the alpha that we can compare it to are more specialized firearms. SMGs are great in close quarter, but they can't reach out and touch someone quite as effective as the STG. Or how about the Gewehr 43, which has amazing mid to long range effectiveness, but it gets stomped on by the STG in the close game. This lack of a full picture makes judging whether a weapon is OP or not impossible, as we have nothing to properly compare it to. What worries me is that this build will be used as the basis for other assault rifle type weapons in Battlefield 5 moving forward, gimping potential weapons like the FG42 or the AS44 before they even had a chance to shine. Those weapons have not yet been confirmed, but I think it is extremely likely that we will see them in Battlefield 5. I don't, however, think that attrition played a significant role in the outcry against the STG, as anyone with more than 81 health would have still required the full 4 bullets to kill. I'm sure it affected some players, but not the vast majority that have raised hell so far. If anything, the changes to the STG made ammo attrition irrelevant for the players who use it, as you have a higher total kill potential, meaning how many kills you can get without running out of ammo. Plus, as mentioned in previous sections of this video, more players have been running in large groups, meaning that less ammo is expended overall, with more opportunities to resupply between being near supports that play their role, or by visiting supply stations every time the Horde makes a pit stop at an objective. To summarize this already too long video, I am concerned with the direction that DICE is heading with these premature nerfs. The only thing that almost every Battlefield veteran and competitive player praised about the first alpha was the gunplay, how it was responsive, rewarding, but most of all fun. Making the best selling point of the alpha worse off is not a good mentality to have, especially when it has larger ramifications to the overall game mentality and seems to contradict everything we have heard about the game thus far. We were told that Battlefield 5 would return to the core of what made Battlefield great, and put an emphasis on the individual skill while rewarding squad play. The changes made to just one weapon in the alpha have made a much larger impact than most would believe. Developers need to protect gamers against themselves. Not everyone has the time, the drive, nor do they feel the need to dive into the underlying mechanics of the game to really analyze how each change affects them and the game as a whole. Don't let the masses control the game. I understand that showing responsiveness to the community is necessary in this day and age, and it is appreciated, but measures should always be taken to ensure that the community-based decisions do not harm the game as a whole. What I want at the end of the day is for Battlefield 5 to be the best game possible. I want this game to be competitive, rewarding, and encourage players to push themselves to get better. All of the reasons that I listed in this video are direct examples of the ways that a seemingly insignificant change has compounding effects that harm the game and lower the skill ceiling. Yes, I understand that balance is always important, but perfectly balanced weapons means that there is no meaningful player choice or progression. If all weapons perform and feel the same, then what is the point of having different weapons? There should always be a quote-unquote best gun, but that gun should be hard to master. This will give new and old players alike goals to work towards as they try to be the most effective player on the battlefield. This is why recoil and the overall damage curve should be the primary balancing acts for the weapon. Make the STG harder to use rather than not worth using. But that's my spiel. I would genuinely like to know your thoughts and opinions regarding this matter. Do you agree with the points that I made, or no, am I just someone who's crying because his favorite toy was broken? Before I sign off, I want to applaud anyone for making it this far. This is my longest scripted video to date, and I spent a lot of time analyzing gameplay and looking for behaviors and evidence before making the claims that I did. If you enjoyed these in-depth looks at Battlefield, then I ask you to leave a like and consider subscribing. My name is Shadox, and I hope to see you on the battlefield.